Arthur Morgan's relationship with Captain Thomas Monroe in Red Dead Redemption 2 is one of the quiet moral turning points of the entire game, because it strips away gang politics, outlaw codes, and survival instincts, and leaves Arthur face to face with responsibility. This isn't a rivalry or a partnership built on crime. It's a fragile alliance rooted in conscience, and it exposes how far Arthur has come by the time they meet. Captain Monroe is a U.S. Army officer stationed at Fort Wallace, tasked with overseeing relations with the Wapiti tribe during a period of extreme tension. Unlike Colonel Favors, Monroe isn't motivated by expansion, ego, or cruelty. He's bound by orders he doesn't believe in and trapped inside a system that rewards obedience over morality. When Arthur first encounters Monroe, the dynamic is uncomfortable. Arthur is an outlaw who has spent his life hurting people for money. Monroe is an officer wearing the uniform of a government actively oppressing Native Americans. Neither man fits cleanly into the role he's supposed to represent. What makes their interaction so powerful is how quickly Monroe recognizes Arthur's humanity, and how rare that recognition is for Arthur at this stage of the story. By the time Arthur helps the Wapiti, he's already sick, disillusioned with Dutch, and deeply aware that his life is running out. Monroe doesn't lecture him or threaten him. He asks for help because he knows the system he serves won't do the right thing on its own. That alone reframes Arthur's self-image. For once, he isn't being used for violence. He's being trusted to prevent it. The missions involving Monroe and Eagle Flies focus on restraint rather than aggression. Arthur steals medicine meant for the tribe, helps relocate the Wapiti under cover of darkness, and repeatedly acts to reduce bloodshed rather than escalate it. These actions stand in direct opposition to Dutch's approach, which becomes increasingly aggressive and exploitative. Dutch sees the Wapiti as leverage, a distraction that can draw military attention away from the gang. Monroe sees them as people being crushed by political ambition. Arthur is caught between those views, and his choices here are among the most morally clear in the game. One of the most telling moments is Monroe's quiet insistence that he can no longer follow orders that will lead to innocent deaths. When he chooses to abandon his post to help the Wapiti escape, he knows he's sacrificing his career, his safety, and possibly his life. Arthur understands that cost instantly. It mirrors his own growing realization that doing the right thing often means losing everything else. There's no grand speech, no dramatic rebellion. Just a man deciding that obedience is no longer an excuse. Arthur's protection of Monroe during their escape is deeply symbolic. Earlier in the game, Arthur protects Dutch's authority, Micah's recklessness, and the gang's worst impulses. Here, he's protecting a man whose only crime is trying to reduce harm. This is Arthur choosing who deserves loyalty. It's also one of the few times Arthur's violence is purely defensive. Not to profit, not to intimidate, but to give someone else a chance to do the right thing. Captain Monroe's departure marks a sharp contrast with the rest of the story's trajectory. While Dutch doubles down on control and paranoia, Arthur invests his remaining strength in preserving life where he can. Monroe survives, but his survival isn't framed as a victory. It's a moral success in a world where systemic cruelty continues unchecked. Arthur doesn't fix the problem, he simply refuses to be part of it. This relationship also reframes Arthur's view of authority. Monroe proves that morality isn't tied to uniforms or titles, just as criminality isn't tied to lawlessness alone. Good and evil in Red Dead Redemption 2 aren't factions. They're choices made under pressure. Arthur, for perhaps the first time, acts without expecting reward, forgiveness, or legacy. By the time Arthur parts ways with Monroe, the change is irreversible. Arthur has stopped asking whether he deserves redemption, and started acting as if other people do. Captain Monroe doesn't save Arthur, and Arthur doesn't save the Wapiti. What they do instead is acknowledge responsibility in a system designed to erase it. That makes their brief alliance one of the most honest, grounded, and quietly powerful arcs in the game. A reminder that even at the end of a violent life, choosing restraint can still mean something. What makes Arthur and Captain Monroe's story linger is how deliberately understated its consequences are. There's no epilogue scene showing Monroe thriving, or the Wapiti finally safe. In fact, the game goes out of its way to remind you that Arthur's actions don't magically undo centuries of injustice. Colonel Favors continues his campaign, the government keeps expanding, and the world moves forward with brutal indifference. That realism is what gives the arc its weight. Arthur isn't fighting to win. He's fighting to not become worse. Arthur's conversations with Monroe also subtly reshape how Arthur talks about himself. Earlier in the game, Arthur dismisses his own goodness whenever it's acknowledged. With Monroe, he doesn't argue. He listens. That silence is important. It shows Arthur has stopped needing validation and started understanding accountability. Helping Monroe isn't about feeling better. It's about doing less harm in the time he has left. Monroe's fear is also key. Unlike Dutch, who romanticizes resistance, Monroe is visibly scared. He knows what happens to officers who disobey orders, especially when it involves protecting native people. Arthur respects that fear because it's honest. Courage here isn't loud or violent. It's choosing to act while knowing the cost. That resonates with Arthur, who is finally facing the cost of his own life choices. When Arthur shields Monroe during their escape, the gunfire feels different. There's no bravado, no speeches, no sense of victory. It's desperate, quiet survival. This is Arthur at his most human. Not an outlaw legend, not Dutch's enforcer, just a dying man refusing to let another decent person be crushed by a system he can no longer fight head-on. In the end, Captain Monroe survives because Arthur believes survival itself can be meaningful. Not glorious, not revolutionary, just meaningful. And that belief carries forward into Arthur's final decisions with John,